In security matters, unlocking soldier suicide. 6 years ago, the Army and the National Institute of Mental Health took on an ambitious project of using big data to identify suicide risk. The project is called STARS, the Study to Assess Risk and Resilience in Service Members. For more, I'm joined by Frank Konkel, technology reporter and events editor for the Government Executive Media Group. Frank, explain the study. What type of information do the Army use, and what are they trying to accomplish?
Okay, thanks for having me, Morris. So the study was a 5-year program, came to fruition in 2009 after a large increase in the number of suicides from soldiers dating back to when troops went overseas for the Afghanistan and Iraq campaigns following September 11th. It came from a $50 million grant, and what the first part of the study did, there's 2 parts, and we'll get to the second part soon, but the first part went through and examined military personnel records, health records, administrative data going back to 2004 for hundreds of thousands of active soldiers to try to figure out what would put soldiers at risk for suicide. So they would see who actually attempted suicide and then try to correlate that data with previous information that the Defense Department and Army had collected over the years.
Now, Frank, there are significant privacy implications here. How will that factor into the Army's use of all this data?
Yeah, there's a lot of big privacy concerns. So the Army's gotten this information in the first part of the study now, so they know some of the things that flag soldiers for suicide. But what the next step is figure out how to ethically use that data. So let's say that you and I were up for the same position in the Army, and that the data sets that they had on me said that I was a risk for suicide. That could be used negligently, or some could say unethically, to hold me from getting a position that I may or may not deserve, right? So it wouldn't be based on just your records then, but all these other data sets that you may or may not be able to even control. So that's one question that has to be answered. And then there's another too, as the Army looks to downsize, and we know it's going to do that because of budget costs and whatnot. Would you want to get rid of some of these folks that pose a higher flag or risk factor in suicide? And that's of course, that could be argued as a no-no. And some of the guys that I've interviewed for this piece argue just that, including the data scientists that helped author it.
They're certainly in a predicament. The same model that helps to identify soldiers at risk for suicide also helps to identify soldiers at risk for accidental death or serious injury. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so once they put a lot of these data sets together, and we're talking a massive amount of data, we're talking hundreds of terabytes of data. Just for context, the entire printed Library of Congress would be about 10 terabytes. So this is like 10 to 20 times more than that information. Once they put that together, they found a lot of these flag factors. Well, the same flag factors that would lead someone to potentially attempt suicide also suggest they may be at high risk for accidental deaths. So we're talking training exercises, things like that, drunk driving accidents on or near military bases, and other adverse behaviors. So it doesn't come as a huge shock if you think about it, though, because if you may or may not value your own life highly, it may lead you to do more risky behavior with others, people that are in your units, that type of thing.
Now, there are a lot of data points that went into this analysis. I'm curious about 2 in particular. How do stop-loss orders and multiple deployments impact suicide risk?
That's a great question. So stop-loss orders, just for people who don't know, that's when you're on a deployment, you're an active soldier, and they extend your deployment. They kind of tell you at the last minute, hey, you're going to be doing this for another 9 months or something like that. And then multiple deployments for years, for many years. In fact, people would testify from the Army in front of Congress and try to figure out what in the world was causing this increased suicide rate. Well, multiple deployments were just thought to cause more trauma in soldiers who go overseas. Naturally, one would think, okay, if I'm on a second or third tour of duty, I might have seen more bad experiences, that type of thing. But in fact, this data suggested that the individuals who go on multiple tours of duty don't see an increase in suicide risk, which is kind of counterintuitive to the sort of myth that was propagated over the years. So that was a big piece of information. The same fact held true for stop-loss orders. We thought that people who were sort of told at the last minute, hey, you're going to be staying over here for an extended period of time in a war zone, we thought that would increase the risk, and it was normal to think that, but in fact that's not the case at all. And over the years, the highest increase in suicide risk among soldiers has actually been soldiers who weren't deployed at all.
Well, it's all important information. I'm glad you brought this to light. Frank Konkel, technology reporter and events editor for the Government Executive Media Group. Thanks again, Frank.
Thanks, Morris.